Good afternoon. Welcome to Cool Springs. This is our short series, Heroes and Heroines of the Bible. Today we're looking in Romans chapter 16. Generally, when Romans chapter 16 is talked about in pulpits or in Bible studies, and they mention a woman, the one woman they mention is Phoebe, because Phoebe is a businesswoman, and she is one of the people that is helping support Paul in ministry, and Paul sends her from Corinth, where she lived, to Rome with the letter that we know as the book of Romans. And Paul describes her in the Greek, it calls her a deaconess of the church, and some translations will translate that term as servant, because they don't want the idea of women having office in the church. So usually when Romans is mentioned, if you're talking about any woman at all, Phoebe's the only one that gets mentioned. But there are some others in here, and that's what we want to make our focus today in this short little podcast. Romans 16 verse 12 is in the middle of this list of people that Paul is writing at the end of the book, and he's saying, greet all these people. These are all people who live in Rome that he's familiar with, and he's giving them greetings. And when you get to verse 12, it says, greet Tryphena and Tryphosa, those women who work hard in the Lord. Greet my dear friend Persis, another woman who has worked very hard in the Lord. That's where we want to stop the reading, because he's going to go on to name some more people, male and female. The idea of working women. When I was born, most women didn't work outside the home. My mom had to go to work when I started the first grade. Why? Because my father had served in World War II as a combat engineer, had spent several years living in tents and moving from place to place, and he came home with a case of emphysema that gradually got worse and worse, to the point that Dad had to take a lot of time off from work because his health was breaking. And he and Mom had 6 kids, and they needed to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table, and Dad wasn't able to work. So Mama had to go to work. And it happened that she started working the year I entered the first grade. In our neighborhood and in our local church community, there was only one other lady that I knew of, a lady who went to our church, who worked outside the home. Her husband also had a disease. He had to be on kidney dialysis. So it was a little odd for us to have Dad be the stay-at-home parent and Mama be the working parent. By the time the 60s turned into the 70s, more and more women were working outside of the home, and during that transitional period, now almost everybody works outside the home. There are still some stay-at-home mothers, but it's largely a case of, if they're raising kids at home, they're having to get by on one income in order for Mom to stay there and be a full-time parent. But in the late 60s and early 70s, our society was beginning to transition from expecting women to not work outside the home, or maybe to only work until they got married or had their first child and then be a stay-at-home parent, to now people were regularly working and putting kids in daycare and continuing to work through the school-age years. And there was a lot of discussion, particularly in churches, on whether or not that was okay, whether or not that was God's role for women. That's not the point of what I'm trying to say here today. I'm pointing out to you that here in the first century, you had some women who were businesswomen. Phoebe, Lydia the dealer in purple, people like Priscilla and Aquila, where they were tent makers like Paul, and Priscilla was active in her husband's business as well as active in the Bible teaching ministry. But in this list of people, that a lot of times people would just read through if they're reading through the Bible in the year, or maybe they'll just kind of read over it and mumble through it because some Bible names are hard to pronounce and you don't see any meat in there. Paul's just listed in one verse, verse 12, 3 women that he describes as working hard for the Lord. There are all kinds of ways you can work hard for the Lord. You don't have to be holding down a full-time job somewhere. You can be a volunteer. He's describing women who are engaged in doing ministry, who were active in their church, doing whatever it was they could do, whether it was as stay-home homemakers or whether it was people like a Phoebe or a Priscilla who had a business. And then he's going to go on in just another verse or so to mention a lady, greet Rufus, chosen in the Lord, and his mother, and this lady isn't even named, and his mother, who has been a mother to me too. Being a spiritual parent, a spiritual mother, is an important task for people to do. Might not get a title, might not get a position or an office, or be recognized as a leader in the church. But being a worker for Christ and being a spiritual mother is important. I can't help but remember one lady in the church that I grew up in. She and her husband did not have any children together, but they were the parents to the youth group. Joe drove the bus on all of our retreats and camps and mission trips and fun outings, and Betty was the spiritual mama of the whole youth group. And we needed people like Jose and Betty, because sometimes young people need to have a godly adult in their life that they can go to and say anything to, share any secret with, knowing that they're going to get godly wisdom, godly advice, godly nurturing from people who don't have the ability to ground them. Sometimes you need people like that. In our church, Betty happened to have a birthday in September. Her birthday was just, or would have been just this past week. She raised up a youth group full of people. She and Jose had us over to their homes on Sunday nights for after-church fellowships, and like I said, went on all the trips that the youth group took, gave lots of godly parental-type advice for us to listen to and take to heart. It's important to have people who work for the Lord. In this case, we need to recognize that the early church not only included people like your Pauls and your Timothys and your Tituses and your church leaders like James, but they had people with names like Tryphena, Tryphosa, Persis, the unnamed woman who was just known as Rufus's mom, who were working for the Lord. Whether you get recognized in your community for working for the Lord or not, God knows your name, and God rewards you for a job well done. They worked hard for the Lord. Thanks for watching.